I was the forgotten one, even on the day of our father's funeral. While the city swelled with black coats and silk ties, I stood at the back of the church in an old wool dress that smelled faintly of cedarwood and mothballs. My sister Clarissa, ever the golden child, accepted condolences with practiced elegance, her diamond-studded tears catching the light like she knew how to make grief photogenic. "You're so strong," people said, as if strength was only visible when worn like one of her designer gowns. I stayed quiet. I always had. When the will was read, it played out like a script we could have written ourselves. To Clarissa and Langford, the lawyer began, "I bequeath the condo in Manhattan, the full 42% stake in Langford and Company, and the family legacy holdings." I didn't look at her, but I could feel her victory smirk blooming. And to Eleanor Grace Langford, he said next, with the tone of someone delivering a sympathy card, "The farmhouse in Cedar Hollow." Silence. Then a few polite coughs. Then Clarissa's cruel, melodic laugh. "Oh, how fitting," she said, tilting her head. She always did like mud and wildflowers. I should have been hurt, but there was a strange calm rising in me. Maybe it was the absurdity of it all, how my father, a man who once told me I was too sentimental for boardrooms, had gifted me a rotting piece of wood and memory as my inheritance. The farmhouse had belonged to our grandfather, and, before that, to our great-grandparents. It sat on 60 acres of untamed land, deep in the woods of Vermont. No one had lived there in decades. I hadn't stepped foot in it since I was 11, the summer before my mother died. "You can sell it," Clarissa said dismissively as we left the law office. "I'm sure some backwoods poet would love it." I didn't respond. Let her think what she wanted. She always did. But something had stirred when I heard the words Cedar Hollow. A faint tugging behind my ribs. That house was more than a memory. It was a promise once whispered by my mother as she tucked me into the attic room with patchwork quilts and moonlight spilling through the cracks in the roof. "Someday," she had said, brushing hair from my forehead, "this place will show you everything." When I arrived at the farmhouse 3 days later, the wind greeted me like an old friend with a long memory. The shutters groaned against their hinges. Ivy coiled like secrets around the porch posts. The front door stuck, but when it finally gave way, it sighed open as if the house had been holding its breath all these years, waiting for someone to come home. The floors creaked like they remembered me. Dust blanketed every surface. But underneath the decay, I saw it, the bones of a life not yet finished. Handmade banisters. A fireplace carved with initials. My mother's watercolor paintings still hanging crookedly in the hallway. I spent that first night in the attic, wrapped in wool and moonlight once again. It was there, lying on the old iron bed frame, that I remembered the key. The one my mother had given me in secret, pressed into my palm with a solemn smile just weeks before she died. "Not yet," she had whispered, "but one day." I'd worn it on a chain around my neck for years, then tucked it away in a jewelry box when the world told me it was childish to believe in fairy tales and hidden doors. The next morning, I found the courage to use it. In the hallway closet behind the staircase, there was a panel loose with time. I pried it open. The key slid into a lock hidden behind rotting wood and years of silence. The door creaked open to reveal a staircase I didn't know existed, spiraling down into darkness. The wooden staircase descended into a darkness so dense it seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. Each step groaned beneath my weight, as if complaining after decades of solitude. The air grew cooler, damper, with a scent that clung to my lungs, earth and mildew, yes, but also something metallic, something old. At the bottom, my light found stone walls and a dirt floor packed down from years of neglect. This wasn't just a cellar, it was a chamber. The walls were lined with wooden crates, their labels long faded or eaten by time. Against the far wall sat a heavy iron safe, its handle rusted but intact. I stared at it for a long moment. The house had always been my mother's sanctuary, a place of stories and tea and dried lavender in jars. But this room? This was different. My mother wasn't a woman of safes and secrets. This was something my grandfather, or someone before him, had built. And now it was mine. The key that had opened the hidden door didn't fit the safe. I tried anyway, out of instinct. But no, this mystery required a different answer. I spent hours sorting through the crates, brushing away cobwebs, and sneezing through dust clouds. Most held old ledgers, farming equipment, antique kitchenware. But one box, tucked in the corner, beneath a threadbare quilt, was filled with journals. Handwritten in looping cursive, the ink faded in places, but still legible. They weren't my mother's. They were my great-grandmother's. March 3, 1932. The land sings at night. I told Edward again that we should keep the ledger hidden. He laughed, of course. He says no one will believe a woman who talks of singing land and secrets buried under apple trees. But I know what I saw. What my grandmother saw before me. What this house protects. I read until the candle I'd lit sputtered out. Then I read by flashlight, barely able to keep my hands steady. The entries hinted at something unimaginable, that the Langford family fortune hadn't come solely from textile mills and clever investments as we were always told. There were references to maps, foreign coins, smuggling routes from Europe during the war. And buried treasure, yes, actual buried treasure, hidden on the property. Not metaphorical treasure. Not heirlooms or letters of sentimental value. But something real. Something worth hiding in journals sealed in wax and stashed away in crates no one was ever supposed to find. I surfaced from the cellar just as the morning light broke through the trees. The house groaned with the wind, whispering promises to me now that I had heard her song again. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Clarissa, hope you've sold that shack. We're celebrating my promotion tonight. Try not to think about the penthouse you'll never have. I stared at the screen. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the urge to respond. What could I say? Enjoy the condo. I'm about to discover something bigger than any corner office. I made a cup of tea and carried it to the porch, watching the sunlight crawl across the overgrown field. Beneath that earth, beneath the vines and stones and time, there was something waiting. And this time, I wouldn't be talked out of digging. I spent the next 3 days combing through the farmhouse like an archaeologist of my own history. Every drawer, every loose floorboard, every panel in the walls whispered of a time when secrets were stored not in hard drives or cloud storage, but in faded ink, locked safes, and stories passed down through hushed conversations. In one of the attic trunks beneath a pile of my mother's old linens, I found a velvet pouch containing 4 gold coins. Real ones. Heavy in my hand, stamped with the crest of a European monarch I didn't recognize. Alongside them, a brittle envelope, sealed and yellowed with time, addressed in the same elegant hand I had seen in the journals. To the daughter who chooses to see. I didn't open it right away. Not because I was afraid, but because part of me had already started to understand. This wasn't just a game of inheritance anymore. It was a test. A passage. The Langford women had been silenced and sidelined for generations, decorative, dutiful, and dismissed. But not forgotten. I finally opened the letter on a rainy afternoon, the kind that seemed made for revelations. The paper crackled as I unfolded it, the words beginning not with a greeting, but with a warning. What we built, we buried. Not for shame, but for safety. The gold will tempt, but the ledger is the map. Trust the roses. Follow the rain. Do not be swayed by those who value glass over grit. They will come for what they never earned. I read it 3 times, and still my pulse didn't settle. The next morning, I wandered the land. I hadn't walked the field since I was a child, when my mother would pack a wicker basket with sandwiches and ginger beer and lead me down the trails humming old lullabies. The trees seemed taller now, the creek louder. The roses, wild and unpruned, still bloomed in soft, defiant clusters along the fence line. Trust the roses, I whispered to myself. I traced the path along the old orchard, long since overtaken by brambles. And then I saw it. A rose bush, different from the rest. Larger, older. Like it had been planted with purpose, its roots tangled around the base of a stone marker, nearly obscured by moss. I knelt down, heart thudding. Beneath the brush, something metallic glinted, an iron ring, embedded into the earth. A handle. It took most of the day to dig, the summer soil stubborn and damp. But eventually, the wooden edge of a trapdoor revealed itself. I pried it open with a crowbar I found in the barn, muscles screaming in protest. Below, a ladder descended into darkness. Again. And again I went. At the bottom was a chamber smaller than the first, this one dry and fortified. In the center sat a wooden chest, simple, locked, worn at the corners like it had been touched often, like it had waited for me. Inside? Not treasure. Not yet. But a thick leather-bound ledger, sealed with red ribbon and etched with a family crest I had never seen before. And maps. Old ones. Some in French. Others in German. Routes, ports, circled islands with dates from the 1940s. One was marked in red ink, Langford Hollow, 1952. Whatever my family had been involved in, it stretched across oceans and decades. I held the ledger like it was a beating heart. Above me, the storm had begun. And somewhere far away, Clarissa was likely raising a glass of champagne, laughing about her new promotion, unaware that the sister she mocked was about to rewrite the entire legacy she thought belonged to her. I stayed up that night translating the ledger. My French was rusty, but desperation sharpens the tongue. What I couldn't decipher, I cross-referenced with online archives, whispered forums, and even a few dusty war history books I kept from college. This wasn't some idle journal, it was a record. Of gold. Of jewels. Of art, smuggled out of war-torn Europe by a clandestine group of aristocrats and financiers in the 1940s. The Langford name appeared more than once. We weren't textile moguls by accident. My great-grandfather, Edward Langford, had funded and protected a portion of this exodus. Under the guise of Reconstruction donations, wealth that might have been destroyed or seized was quietly funneled out through estates like ours. The farmhouse in Cedar Hollow? A quiet waypoint. A vault. The ledger noted C.H. Vault 3, sealed September 1947. My skin tingled. The initials were unmistakable. Cedar Hollow. I texted a historian friend from my university days, Dr. Anika Lemoyne. She specialized in World War II provenance cases. I didn't give her everything, just enough to stir her interest. Anika, what would you say if I told you my family may have been custodians of Nazi-era smuggled artifacts? I'd say stop joking unless you've got documents. I've got documents. And maps. And a vault I just opened. The dots on the screen blinked for a full minute before her next message came through. I'm on a train first thing tomorrow. Don't show anyone else. I'm serious, Elle. By morning, I had marked out every location mentioned in the ledger and cross-checked them against my property survey. One stood out, a small circle etched with the symbol of a rose and the words Eden, sealed by fire. I stared at it for a long time. Sealed by fire was something my mother used to whisper when she told bedtime stories. I'd always assumed it was metaphorical. Poetic. She had a way of turning the cruelest truths into fairy tales. But what if they weren't stories? What if she had been preparing me all along? Clarissa called around noon. I let it ring. Then a text followed. Dad's lawyer called. They're reviewing the estate again. Something about a mistake in the original paperwork. Apparently there's interest in your shack from someone in Europe? You're not actually thinking of keeping that dump, are you? That word again. Dump. Shack. Farmhouse. As if bricks and wood defined worth. I smiled at the message. She had no idea. No idea that beneath the creaking floorboards and vines lived a secret empire. That I was holding a ledger that, if proven authentic, could rewrite World War II art history. That the worthless inheritance she laughed at held something the world had long believed lost. That night, I made myself a simple dinner, rosemary potatoes and roasted carrots from the neglected garden that somehow still bore life. I ate by candlelight in the old dining room, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and memory. The walls had ears, I used to think as a child. Now I knew they had more than that. They had stories. And I intended to tell them. By the time Anika arrived the next morning, the storm had passed. A low mist hung over the fields like the house was holding its breath again, waiting. I met her at the old train station, her boots soaked through and her bag slung across one shoulder, overflowing with folders and her ever-curious eyes. You weren't joking, she said as she stepped onto the gravel path, her gaze sweeping the horizon, settling on the farmhouse. It smells like history. I laughed. It smells like mildew and regret. But the joke didn't land, not really. Because we both felt it. Something here was watching. Not malevolently, but with gravity. As if the land had a memory and knew this moment was coming. Back at the house, I laid everything out. The journals, the maps, the coins, the letter addressed to the daughter who chooses to see. She combed through each item with care, white gloves tugged over her hands like she was handling relics at the British Museum. Then she stopped cold over the ledger. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Eleanor, this isn't just family history. This is evidence. I leaned over. Of what? She tapped the ink-stained page with a reverent fingertip. Operation Edelrose. It's a name that pops up in rare intelligence reports, rumored shipments of cultural treasures hidden across Europe and the U.S. during the fall of Berlin. Nothing has ever been verified. Until now. The hours passed in a blur of cross-referencing, photographing, cataloging. Anika's laptop hummed with archives and encrypted university portals. Her excitement burned hotter with every new document. You have something that could break open decades of lost art and finance trails, she said. Do you understand what this means? I shook my head. I just wanted to know why my mother whispered riddles to me and why my sister thought I inherited trash. She smiled. Well, it's not trash. It's history. It's power. And it's going to get attention. That part unsettled me. We spent the afternoon following the map to Eden, sealed by fire. It led us to the far edge of the property, where the land sloped into a grove of oaks and the earth gave way to stone. There was a fire pit, ringed with cracked bricks. It looked ordinary. Until Anika ran her boot across the ground and unearthed a small engraving on the stone base, Lambda, E. 1947. Langford Estate. 1947. Anika knelt, her breath catching. There's something beneath this, she said. Something metal. It took us hours to lift the stones and dig, but when we did, we uncovered another vault, smaller than the one in the cellar, but sealed with steel. And unlike the last one, this had a combination lock. I remembered the dates from the journals, the coordinates, the roses. And then it hit me, my mother's birthday. But not the one we celebrated. The one scribbled in the corner of her painting of Cedar Hollow, the day she'd first arrived as a girl. I turned the dial. The lock clicked. Inside was a chest lined with velvet. And inside that? Jewelry. Sculptures. Stacks of vintage bonds and currency. And a painting wrapped in canvas and wax paper, still intact, still vibrant. A pastoral scene and signed, but unmistakable. I didn't need Anika to say it, though she did. This might be a lost Muller. If authenticated, it could be worth. She trailed off. We both knew the number would dwarf Clarissa's condo, her company shares, even the entire Langford portfolio. $120 million wouldn't be an exaggeration. It was a legacy hidden in plain sight. And it had chosen me. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, the velvet-wrapped painting resting at my feet like some relic rescued from the wreckage of time. Anika had gone to her hotel in town, her laptop filled with scanned pages and encrypted notes she refused to upload to any cloud. Too many eyes, she'd said, packing up. This story's going to echo well. And it needs to belong to you. I wasn't sure what that meant. Belonging had never been something I felt when it came to my family. But as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long gold shadows across the yard, I began to feel it in my bones. Then, as if the universe couldn't resist a touch of dramatic irony, my phone rang. Clarissa. I stared at the screen. Let it buzz 4 times. Let it almost go to voicemail. Then I answered. Her voice was bright and too sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something but hadn't yet decided how to ask for it. Elle, you've been quiet. Everything okay out in the sticks? I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Everything's fine. You got the message from the lawyer, right? About the estate revision? It's probably nothing, just a clerical thing. But I thought maybe you'd want to come back to the city? Have dinner? Catch up. There was a pause. A slight breath. Then, like the blade of a dagger wrapped in velvet, someone from Geneva called the estate office. A museum contact. Mentioned your name. I said nothing. Strange, right? She continued, too casually. Because you don't even have any art. Not that she knew of. Not that she ever knew what I carried in my hands, or in my heart. You sound nervous, I said softly. There was a pause. Then the mask slipped. Just slightly. Elle, listen. If you found something, anything related to the Langford estate, it could affect the trust. That means lawyers, taxes, public attention. You're not prepared for that. But I am. There it was. Not curiosity. Not concern. Just the calculation of someone who had always played chess while pretending to play bridge. I'll let you know, I said, then ended the call. That night, I lit a fire in the hearth for the first time in years. The painting sat across from me, glowing in the flickering light, and I wondered how many nights my mother sat in that same chair, holding on to secrets she could never fully explain. Not yet, she had said. And now it was time. Tomorrow, Anika and I would drive the ledger to Boston, where she had contacts at a secure university archive. From there, we'd begin the formal authentication process. Carefully, quietly, but not invisibly. Before bed, I walked to the orchard, drawn by a breeze I couldn't explain. The moon was low, the trees whispering in their sleep. I stood where the roses had bloomed, where the first vault had been buried, and I swore I heard it again. The land singing. Softly. A lullaby only I was meant to hear. We left for Boston at dawn. Anika had brought a lockbox, the kind used by couriers handling priceless manuscripts. Inside, the ledger nestled between 2 layers of insulated foam, along with several of the gold coins and the wrapped painting. Every time she adjusted her grip, she glanced over her shoulder like we were being followed. You're jumpy, I said as we stopped for gas somewhere near Concord. She didn't smile. You don't understand how many people would kill, literally, for what you found. Some of the families who lost these artifacts are still looking. Others would rather it all stayed buried. I shivered, even though the car was warm. Once in Boston, we met with her colleague, Dr. Chowdhury, a specialist in lost wartime collections. He was quiet, meticulous, with eyes that flicked over every detail like a scanner. This, he said, lifting the ledger with reverence, is either a very convincing hoax or the most significant discovery in my career. It took all afternoon to authenticate even the surface details. Watermarks, inks, regional dialects in the margin notes. Every test came back the same, legitimate. We'll keep this under lock and camera, Dr. Chowdhury assured me. But it's yours legally. For now. Until provenance is fully verified, it's in a kind of limbo. I nodded. That word again, limbo. It seemed I had lived most of my life there. As we walked out of the lab into the falling dusk, Anika nudged me gently. So, what will you do with all this? The question caught me off guard. It was easier to focus on the maps, the vaults, the logistics. But beneath it all was a deeper truth. I had inherited a power Clarissa never even saw coming. Not just wealth. Not just legacy. But a story. And for the first time, it was mine to tell. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I won't sell it. Not to museums, not to galleries, not yet. This isn't a headline. It's a lineage. It's our name, buried under shame and silence. Anika looked at me with something like pride. You sound more Langford than any of them. Maybe. Or maybe I'm what a Langford was meant to be. That night in the hotel, Clarissa's name lit up my phone again. 3 missed calls. 2 voicemails. 1 text. I know you're ignoring me. This is serious. You could get us sued if you say the wrong thing. Dad would never have trusted you with this. It's not yours. There it was. The truth finally bare. It's not yours. How many times had I heard those words in one form or another? As children, as teens, even after the funeral. Every celebration I planned, every family photo I took. Every moment, I kept my voice low and my head down. Because Clarissa always believed everything belonged to her by default. This time, she was wrong. This time, the story was mine. The next morning, I stood in front of the painting again. It lay on the work table in Dr. Chowdhury's lab, half unwrapped, its colors more vivid in the morning light than they had any right to be after decades underground. It depicted a woman in profile, her face half turned toward a sun-drenched orchard, my orchard. The brushwork was elegant, defiant, unfinished. "It's not a Muller," Anika said softly beside me. "At least not from any documented series. But it's something." She adjusted the magnifier, her breath catching. "Wait." She gently folded back the edge of the canvas. There, faint beneath the corner seam, was a signature. Not in paint, but stitched in red thread, like a secret sewn into a story. E.L. Edward Langford. I stared at the initials. They shouldn't have meant anything. But somehow they did. What if he painted this? I asked. What if he wasn't just the vault keeper, the businessman? What if this was his confession? Anika gave me a slow, reverent nod. It would make sense. People who hide treasure always leave a trail. Some just do it in oil and canvas. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop and began to draft an email. Not to a news outlet. Not to a museum. To Clarissa. Because some truths are too powerful to stay hidden, but not all of them belong in a courtroom. Clarissa, you were right about one thing. This inheritance is more than I was prepared for. But not in the way you think. I've found the ledger. The real one. The one our great-grandfather kept buried while you were chasing board seats and brand names. I know what he did. I know how he helped smuggle stolen treasures out of war zones and buried them beneath our feet. And I know now he left it to me for a reason. I won't be silenced. Not this time. Not again. Don't call me. Don't threaten me. The truth's already in motion. L. I didn't expect a reply. And for hours, there was none. But at 3:47 a.m., as I sat in the hotel bathtub reading the last of my mother's journals, a new message popped up. Just 5 words. What else did you find? No anger. No denial. Just fear disguised as curiosity. For the first time, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Because the world Clarissa had built, polished, curated, and ruthlessly defended, was crumbling under the weight of a single buried truth. And I was no longer the sister she could laugh off as eccentric or irrelevant. I was the one holding the match. Back at Cedar Hollow, the house no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a vault cracking open after decades of silence, air and light rushing back into lungs long collapsed. Every creaking stair and shifting shadow spoke differently now, as if the house, having tested me, had chosen to trust me. I brought the painting home. Anika protested, of course. You should store it in a controlled environment. I will, I promised. But first, it needs to be here. Just for a little while. She relented, and I drove it north wrapped in linen and careful silence. Back in the living room, once my mother's sanctuary, then my prison of invisibility, I set the canvas on the mantel and stepped back. And stared. Not at the orchard behind the woman. Not at the brushstrokes or the signature. At her. The woman's face, her half-turned smile, the soft slope of her cheek, looked achingly familiar. Not in the way famous portraits seem familiar. No. Personal. And then I saw it. She looked like my mother. No. She was my mother. Younger, perhaps. But it was her. That same thoughtful gaze. The same freckle near the jawline. The same almost smile that always made you wonder what secret she was keeping. Eden, sealed by fire, she used to say. A phrase I thought was poetry. What if it was prophecy? That night, I pulled out the last journal. One I hadn't dared open. It was labeled in my mother's handwriting. A single name, Eleanor. My name. Inside were entries from the last year of her life, after the diagnosis, after the silence between us began to settle in like fog. She's the only one who hears the house. I tried to show Clarissa. She laughed. Always laughs. She'll never listen. But Elle listens. Even when I say nothing. If you find this, sweetheart, you're ready. You always were. Burn the past, but don't bury it. Let them see what they tried to forget. The entries blurred as I read them, tears smudging the ink. She had been guiding me. Not just in memory, not just through old keys and nursery rhymes, but with intention. With trust. She knew Clarissa would inherit the spotlight. But I inherited the story. Outside, wind whispered through the orchard again. The same wind that once carried my mother's songs. Now it sang to me. And in its rustle, I heard a promise. That whatever came next, lawyers, headlines, threats from cousins and trustees, I would not face it alone. Because I wasn't the forgotten Langford anymore. I was the keeper. And I had only just begun to speak. 2 days later, the letter arrived. A thick cream envelope, hand-delivered by a courier in a sharp suit who wouldn't meet my eyes. The Langford estate crest pressed into the wax like a seal from another century. I knew what was inside before I even opened it. A cease and desist. Regarding unauthorized possession and potential misrepresentation of Langford family holdings. I laughed, out loud and alone, as I read it on the porch, mug of tea trembling slightly in my hand. So it had begun. The formal pushback. The legal pressure. The part where Clarissa, no longer amused, tried to reclaim the narrative. She didn't understand. Not yet. This wasn't about reclaiming objects. It was about reclaiming truth. And truth, once spoken, doesn't go quietly. I sent a copy of the letter to Anika and Dr. Chowdhury. They both responded within minutes. Anika, let them try. You've got provenance, original records, and a journal trail that predates any trust clauses. Chowdhury, their threats won't hold. We'll release findings when the full verification is complete. If they go public first, they risk exposure. Still, I knew Clarissa's playbook. She wasn't just aiming for legal wins, she was aiming for silence. To make the process so overwhelming, I'd crumble. To turn my discovery into a burden I'd beg to give up. She didn't know me anymore. Maybe she never had. That afternoon, I stood again at the stone ring in the orchard, hands buried in my coat pockets, the cold biting deeper now. Fall had begun to shift toward winter, and the sky above was gray as ash. I turned my mother's words over in my mind. Burn the past, but don't bury it. What did she mean? Was it metaphor? Or instruction? I walked back to the house, straight into the cellar. My fingers found the hidden compartment beneath the stairs, the one we hadn't opened yet, the one I'd ignored out of exhaustion or fear or both. Inside was a metal box, rusted at the edges. I pried it open and gasped. Inside were burned fragments of paper. Only partial words remained. A name. A date. A seal. All charred, but barely legible. It was Clarissa's name. And a signature. My father's. Some kind of amendment. A document reassigning estate holdings. But half the page had been turned to ash. Had my mother burned it? To protect me? To protect something? I sat down on the dirt floor, box in my lap, heart hammering. This was the story Clarissa didn't want told. That our father had tried, maybe even succeeded, in changing the will before he died. And someone had tried to erase it. Not through ink. Through fire. That night, I scanned what fragments I could. Uploaded them to the archive Chowdhury had set up. Locked them behind passcodes and protections, but not out of reach. Because stories like this? They're meant to be found. They're meant to rise from the ashes. And this time, they would. The first snow fell that night. It came soft and silent, dusting the orchard in powdered grace, blanketing the farmhouse roof in a hush so thick it muffled even the ghosts. I watched it from the attic window, seated cross-legged on the braided rug where my mother once told me stories about the women who came before. As a child, I thought she meant fairy tale characters. As a woman, I knew better. They were the Langford women. And I was becoming one. I lit a candle and opened the last journal again, her journal. The one addressed to me. The one I hadn't had the courage to finish. You may be reading this in winter, she had written in her small looping script. If you are, the land will be sleeping, but not silent. There are still things it will show you if you listen. If you're brave. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the page. The will was changed. I saw him do it. He never said why, but I knew. He saw what you saw. He understood what Clarissa would never honor. But when he died so suddenly, the ink changed color, darker, more hurried. Clarissa and the lawyers destroyed the second will. Or tried to. I kept the ash. I kept the truth. It isn't gone. I stood abruptly, the candle nearly toppling from its holder. She knew. All along. She'd kept the secret not because she trusted the system, but because she trusted me. Because she'd known the time would come when truth had to be louder than legacy. Downstairs, the fireplace crackled with slow-burning logs, and I spread out every map, every journal, every scrap of scorched paper across the dining room table. There was a symmetry forming, a story emerging in folds and fragments. The vaults, the ledger, the signatures, the painting, the hidden will. All of it told the same tale. The Langford legacy was never meant to be Clarissa's alone. It had always been divided between the ones who chased prestige and the ones who preserved memory. And I, the invisible daughter, had been chosen as the keeper. The next morning, the house was colder than usual. I threw on my coat and boots and trudged out to the barn, the one my grandfather had used to store tools, but that had, in recent years, become nothing more than a graveyard for rusted equipment. Except something had changed. A corner of the barn floor, once sunken and weathered, now bore new marks. A faint track of boot prints leading to a tarp. Underneath it, a hatch. Not another vault. Something older. Cruder. A root cellar, maybe. Or something even more ancient. I hesitated. My fingers brushed the latch. It was warm. I descended the narrow staircase with a flashlight clenched in my teeth, each step groaning like an old throat clearing itself before a confession. At the bottom, I found crates. Dozens of them. Marked not with family symbols, but with stenciled names and numbers. Government numbers. Archives. And then, my flashlight beam caught it. A crate marked property of U.S. military recovery, 1946. Inside were documents. Sealed packages. Artwork, wrapped in linen and labeled in French and German. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just Langford wealth buried here. It was stolen history. Hidden. Protected. Forgotten. When I surfaced from the barn hours later, snow still falling around me, I realized I was holding something more dangerous than art or gold. I was holding the power to rewrite an entire chapter of our family, and perhaps even national, history. I could expose the Langford family's involvement in one of the most secretive art recoveries of post-World War II America. Or, I could keep it quiet. Negotiate. Trade the truth for something bigger than revenge. Back inside, I found Clarissa had emailed again. Subject, enough. Asterisk L. We both know how this ends. You have something that was never meant for you. I'm offering you a way out. Name your price. A settlement. A share of the trust. I'll even throw in the apartment in Paris. Just don't go public. This isn't just about the family name anymore. It's about real consequences. For all of us. Think carefully. Asterisk. See. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened a new document. Not an email. A manuscript. The beginning of a memoir. I was never supposed to inherit the farmhouse in Cedar Hollow. I was supposed to fade quietly into the shadow of a sister who believed she had claimed the future. But buried beneath rotted floorboards and broken promises was something she never expected: proof. That the invisible daughter had always been the one with the map.